As you've probably gathered already from the video title, today we are going to look at business simulation games or tycoon games. More specifically, I've picked one business simulation game from each year from 1990 to 1999. Not necessarily the best game from each year, but just a game that I wanted to talk about. Those games were a big thing in Germany back in the 90s. I don't know what it is exactly that made them so popular here in our country, but I definitely know that I enjoy playing them very much as they are one of my favorite genres. I've also decided to focus more on actual tycoon games, so I excluded city building games, but as I like that genre as well very much, I might talk about those in the future in a separate video. That's all I have to say here, so let's start with 1990. Sid Meier's Railroad Tycoon is a real classic amongst tycoon games. The simple premise of building train stations, laying down tracks and satisfying supply and demand is really addicting still today. The gameplay loop of delivering goods that are produced at one location to the other where they are needed for production and having well-supplied cities grow over time really gives you a sense of progression that no other game did at the time. And taking the tycoon in its title seriously, just like during the times when the first commercial railroads crossed the country, it's all about stock prices, power and influence, triumphing over all your competitors. It's just such a joy to watch your trains go from one station to the other and seeing your railroad track network growing over time through the whole country. And for train enthusiasts, you've got all the original historical trains and you can really experience how the technology evolved through the decades. The game was so successful that it had 2 sequels, with the second game being my favorite and I think a bit of an overlooked hidden gem nowadays. But maybe that's just personal taste. I'm not saying that it's objectively the best game of the series, I just like the aesthetics and all the atmosphere that the pre-rendered 2D graphics and the interface transports. If you're looking for a more modern Railroad Tycoon game, I can wholeheartedly recommend Train Fever or the Transport Fever games, or Railway Empire. At least the first one. I haven't played the sequel, which seems to be a bit of a letdown regarding Steam reviews. Nevertheless, it's a bit more casual and approachable game that has a great train toy set charm, so if you're into these kinds of games, go check it out. Winzer, which is just the German word for winemaker, is, as far as I remember, the game that introduced me to the whole genre. I'm not going to talk about this here extensively as it has never been translated into English, but just know that it's a nice little tycoon game where you manage your vineyard and you have to grow crops and sell the wine to make a profit. I don't know anything about wine, so some of the terms in the game are just gibberish to me, but nonetheless I managed to play it with a bit of trial and error and it's really not that hard. You can play the game with up to 4 players taking turns, trying to outcompete each other in the limited market. Now what might be more interesting to you is that there's a modern game that has released in 2021 that has a very similar premise. In 100 Days you also manage a vineyard, but this time the presentation has much improved and the game is definitely less dry than the original Winzer game. You have this small puzzle mechanic where you have to arrange each action you want to take each turn, which is a neat concept to break things up a little bit. The game gets a bit repetitive after a while, but if you can get it at a discount under, I would say, $10, it's definitely worth to try. "1992 was a bit hard to pick a game from, as there weren't many business simulation games coming out that year. I considered a Football Manager, but I thought that's more of a different genre, as well as the Partition, which is more a trading sim, I would say, so I went with Airbugs. That's more in line with your typical business simulation game. The game is rather simple and mainly focuses around buying planes and setting up flight routes in order to maximize profit with passenger or cargo transportation. The nice thing about the game is that it takes place in the whole world with real-world locations, so you can start in any country you want and fly your favorite routes. Despite its simplistic nature, it's a bit harsh at the beginning because, well, you just don't know what's profitable and what you're supposed to do, so it involves a lot of trial and error. I mean, probably if you read the manual that will help as well, but I didn't have that at hand back then, don't ask why, and I didn't look into it right now. The user interface definitely takes a bit to get used to. I felt that it was a bit convoluted and I didn't find everything I wanted where I was expecting it. The presentation is also a bit bland, so generally I would say pass on this one and rather give one of the other games a try. If you do want to manage your own airline and you happen to have a Super Nintendo, then maybe check out the Aerobis games. I thought they were much more approachable and entertaining, and released just 1 year after Airbugs. Sorry for the longer introduction here, but I just couldn't get myself to skipping this beautiful music. Every time I hear this epic theme of the game, I really want to go into space exploration and beat the Russians to it. Or, well, if you play the Russians, then beat the United States, of course. So technically this isn't a business simulation game because, well, you play as a government organization, but still it plays like one, and I really like the game and wanted to talk about it because I think it doesn't get the attention it deserves. You play as either side of the space race in the 60s, trying to successfully launch rockets into space and in the end land on the moon. It's a long way to get there and you have to make many difficult decisions in how you want to approach this. You have to manage your budget, do research, train your astronauts, and always try to stay one step ahead of your competitor. This will take you bigger and bigger risks in your endeavors, which leads to a surprisingly nail-biting experience when you actually launch the rockets and see if it's a success or if it blows up in the process. What I really appreciate about the game is its historical context. It creates this dense atmosphere of animosity and competition, and you always have the feeling that there's something big at stake here. Just by playing the game, you actually learn a lot about the race itself and receive a lot of background information if you're interested in that. I also dig the overall presentation. There are so many pictures and short video clips of stock footage to give the game almost a documentary style. There are also many options for difficulty, and you can even edit the astronaut roster and add your own astronauts with your own names if you want to. The perfect opportunity to become one of those heroic astronauts from the time yourself. And don't worry, you don't need rocket science backgrounds to play this game. This is not a Kerbal Space Program type of game. This is really more about managing your resources. That said, it's definitely not an easy game you're going to expect to play through on your first try. There are many things to learn and optimize. Fortunately, the game has a very clear user interface, so that's one less thing you have to worry about. Mi amore, Pizza Connection, or Pizza Tycoon as it has been called in the US. Still to this day, this has to be my favorite business simulation game of all time. Unfortunately, it's really hard for me to wrap my head around why this is the case. There have been numerous restaurant tycoon games, but this one in particular kept me coming back again and again. I mean, the premise is simple. You open up a restaurant, you decorate it, you hire staff, you buy the ingredients, you create your own pizzas, and then you hopefully make a profit. But there's just something about the whole process that's endlessly satisfying. The prospect of being able to design your own pizzas definitely was a hook back then when I played the game, but it's not the only thing that makes this game amazing. One main factor of the game is definitely its charm and presentation. I did also play the Restaurant Empire games, but with their much more realistic appeal they were also a bit boring and dry, whereas Pizza Tycoon with its quirky humor and illustrations just makes for a better time. Quite a few German tycoon games tried to be funny but failed miserably at that. However, Pizza Connection didn't beat you over the head with its humor. It's more in the visuals and there aren't so many bad puns or jokes to speak of. I also very much enjoyed the more subtle, darker side of the game, where you can destroy your competitor's restaurant and actually gain an infamous reputation amongst the criminal underground. Doing that requires you to play a short mini game. It's not that hard, but you will have to do a bit of trial and error to get used to it. But behind its light presentation, there's also quite a bit of depth to be found. There are changing trends amongst ingredients for pizza, so you always have to adapt, and you should always make sure to cater to your specific demographic target audience. The game gives you just enough feedback so that you can figure out what you're doing wrong or right, while the neatly arranged user interface helps you to keep on top of things. Now, the game obviously also has its flaws. The sound and music is nothing to write home about, and it's getting rather tedious in the late game to buy all the ingredients or to keep up with your staff and manager. And the copy protection is maybe fun doing the first time around, but when you have to recreate the original pizza recipes for the third, fourth or fifth time, then it really becomes a chore. The game had 2 official sequels, but while those are not bad, they didn't really ever capture the charm of the original for me, and though I played them for a while, they both became boring after a while and I went back to the original sooner or later. Now who's gonna order me some pizza after all that talking? You? You? How about you in the back that has not subscribed to my channel yet? Yeah, I didn't think so. You better do this right now. Now, as some of you might know, I'm not only making videos on YouTube, but also developing my own games. And I just happen to have released a few Tycoon games myself that I want to show you here. The first one is the Movie Tycoon Simulator, a very chill and casual game where you manage movie theaters and later on can also produce your own movies. You upgrade your theaters or buy new ones and decide which movies you want to show there and when. You can pick from almost 1,000 movies ranging over 30 years that are inspired by movies from during that time. You also have to take care of advertisement and buying enough food and drinks to make your customers happy and a healthy profit. Jolly Putt is a bit of a more in-depth simulation game. It's reminiscent to games from the golden era like Roller Coaster Tycoon or Sim Golf, where you build your own indoor mini-golf park and design courses for your guests to play. Besides all the management fun, you can actually play your own courses and take part in tournaments to unlock items from a variety of new arcade machines, course parts or decoration. There are many little things to optimize, like prices for your arcade machines or your stuff, with lots of statistics and feedback to help you build an amazing park. My newest game is the Retro Game Store Tycoon for Android phones. This game is all about collecting and selling classic video games. In a store you can upgrade and customize over time. The game runs in real time, so you can just keep it running and open it up from time to time to invest in a few upgrades, buy a new few games or try to win an auction. There are 4 countries where you can open up stores and even a retro game convention where you can try to find the most mysterious games. It's free to play and I will put the download links with the links of the other games in the video description below. I hope you give those games a try, and with that, let's continue with the video. What the hell did I just watch? A very funny intro to a very funny German business simulation game. And with funny I mean a lot of boobs and bad stereotypes. Still a highly successful and well-reviewed game that almost sprung its own genre, the erotic tycoon game, with other notable games like the Wet and Lula series. Similar to Theme Hospital, you also manage a hospital here, but that's about where the similarities end. Instead of having an isometric view of your hospital, you go through all these menu screens that are disguised as rooms. So you also don't see patients walking through the floors, but instead directly showing up on the room screens. This gives the game a very different flow where you have to move patients through a chain of rooms, so for example from the reception to the waiting room to the treatment room, and make sure that they pay their bill at the end. This works surprisingly well because the room layout is cleverly designed and you also have a few help functions. Even though the game caters to a more broad and casual audience, there is still some depth to be found in this game. There's a good amount of content and resource management involved, so it will keep you hooked for quite a while. Now, if you can look over or even enjoy the explicit humor, there's quite some fun to be had here. The game had a sequel, Biing 2, where you managed a beach resort, but that unfortunately never got translated into English. Still, if you buy Biing nowadays on GOG, the second game is included, but only in German. So if you're looking for a very unique and different business simulation experience, this might actually be something you want to check out. Now, on the other spectrum of German business simulation games, you have something like Der Planer, which is a down-to-earth, over-serious and very mundane experience. It's almost like work. The game attempts to reproduce the management experience of a shipping company as realistically as possible. Which means lots of phone calls, lots of driving around, lots of managing contracts, lots of looking at numbers. If that sounds fun to you and you're capable of understanding German, then I have good news for you. There are a whopping 9 Planer games and spin-offs, so that should be more than enough to keep you entertained for a while. So, as you might have gathered, this game is not my cup of tea. I did enjoy the first one a bit more because it's a bit simpler, but Der Planer 2 is really a complexity beast. The presentation is no thrills and the driving minigame is really infuriating and becomes boring even after the first drive, and you have to do it over and over, though you can skip it if you don't want to do it. So I think we better move on to the next game. Now isn't that much more fun already? Theme Hospital by Bullfrog is probably the game on this list that most of you already know about. It had been a great success, and for a good reason, because it's a very good game. When I earlier talked about Pizza Connection getting the humor and atmosphere just right, you can say the same thing for Theme Hospital. It's quirky and lighthearted and fun even just to look at. Again, like in Biing, you manage a hospital, but this time around it's much more about planning out your rooms and making the most of the limited space you've got. There are all these funny made-up diseases that you have to cure to make your hospital a big success. You have to manage your stuff and do research to unlock new treatments for newly discovered diseases, making sure that the game doesn't become stale even in the long run. It's just very satisfying to observe all the activity going on when your hospital has grown to a certain size. Even though this looks like your typical Peter Molyneux game, he was not directly involved in the development on the game because he was busy with Dungeon Keeper at the time. The game is very playable even by today's standards. Still, I would recommend 2 Point Hospital, a spiritual successor released in 2018. It's very similar to the original but with updated graphics and amenities that you would expect from a modern game. It also features more content and, well, you don't have to fiddle around with DOSBox or anything. This is a native Windows game after all. So Theme Hospital or 2 Point Hospital are definitely recommendations from me. Airline Tycoon is, as the title suggests, a game where you manage an airline company. You have to plan routes for your planes, ship customers and cargo through the world, and take care of maintenance and upgrades for your planes. The whole game takes place within an airport, and you go to different rooms and locations there to access menus and manage your company. As you can surmise from the visuals alone, this game is also rather light-hearted and not overly difficult to get into. The main aspect of the game is planning out your routes in the most efficient manner, meaning that you have to make sure that your planes are not flying empty when they arrived at one destination and return, and that they are also capable of reaching that destination and having enough passenger and cargo capacity. There are 4 different ways to go about that. You can go to the air travel agent or last minute stand to get predefined missions, or to the cargo hub for cargo missions, or you get the license for regular routes between cities. I think it's a bit of a bummer that the only way you can see your planes fly are these small little icons on the globe, so even though you transport people all over the world, you feel a bit confined in the airport yourself. Generally, there's really not that much to do in the game, but if you are up for a lighter experience, maybe that's exactly what you're looking for. A sequel for the game released in 2011 that I haven't played yet. From the reviews it seems to be about the same quality, but I didn't care too much for the art style, but maybe another day I'll check it out. With that said, let's get to our last game from 1999. Now you might rather have expected another theme park tycoon game that was also released in 1999, Roller Coaster Tycoon. And after its release, I felt everybody has stopped talking about the theme park series, which is a bummer. While these games are not as good as Roller Coaster Tycoon, I think they very well deserve to be remembered. I actually played Theme Park World or Sim Theme Park a long time before I got my hands on Roller Coaster Tycoon. And I remember fondly how impressed I was with the 3D graphics and the ability to walk through your park and even experience the different rides and roller coaster from a first-person perspective. And I have to say, for an early 3D game, this hasn't aged so poorly. I still dig the art style and the vibrant colors, and yes, obviously the textures are of very low quality, but overall, from the perspective you play it most of the time, I think it really holds up. I have to mention though that the footage you see here is only 640 by 480 resolution, and you can play the game at a higher resolution, but I had so much trouble to get the game to work on my PC at all that I didn't figure out how to do that, and was happy that the game was running stable at all. I will put a link in the description of the video that tells you how to run the game on Windows 10. If I had that article from the get-go, it would have been a much easier time. The game itself is an enhanced and 3D version of the original theme park, but they did add the ability to design your own roller coasters with a track layout and everything, so that's definitely a big plus. It's not nearly as involved as in Roller Coaster Tycoon, and the physics simulation can't compare at all, but I think for a more casual experience it's really great what you got here, and it's easy to get into. Another thing that I really appreciated is that you have these different scenarios that you can play, which all come with a different predefined theming for the park. Now this is obviously a limitation on how freely you can design your park, but on the other hand it makes sure that everything looks consistent and you just have less to worry about. The base game has 4 worlds that you can play: the Lost Kingdom, Halloween World, Wonderland and Space Zone. I'm not quite sure if the Gold Edition added any worlds. I think it only added new rides for the game, but it's a bit hard to find information on that. Another notable feature of the game is the tutorial avatar that gives you tips on how to play the game and also how you're doing overall. You can disable it, and you will after a while, because it can get very annoying very quickly. One nitpick with the game that I have is your guests' feedback. You don't get many details, you just see that they are dissatisfied. That's something that Roller Coaster Tycoon definitely does better, where you see the actual thoughts of your guests and can react to them. Still, with some educated guesses, I was able to make most of my guests happy and become profitable with the park. Unfortunately, 2001's Theme Park Inc. or Theme Park Manager was the last game in the series besides a crappy mobile game that came later on. But with modern games like Planet Coaster, Parkitech or Park Beyond, you've got a good selection of alternatives if you want to play them nowadays. So there you go, 10 years of business simulation games done and dusted. I hope you enjoyed watching the video and got a bit of inspiration to maybe try out one of the games yourself. I will definitely come back to one or the other, and I hope we will see many great entries for the genre in the future. And with that, see ya!